Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, brought to you by TournamentPokerEdge.com, the only podcast dedicated exclusively to poker tournament strategy. Now here's your host, Clayton Fletcher.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, sponsored by ACR Poker, where this Sunday, July 28th, 2024 at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, it's the return of the $1,000 TPE free roll. That's right, you can win your share of our $1,000 prize pool absolutely free. Details in the TPE Discord, which you can join for free by clicking the link in the description of this podcast episode. My name is Clayton Fletcher, and I am in bucolic New York City, where I'm very happy to be bringing all of you another episode of this longest running poker strategy podcast ever. That's right, I finally waved the white flag and said goodbye to fabulous Las Vegas. And, you know, they got me this time, guys. It was a brutal summer. It just felt like no matter what I tried, it didn't work. My bluffs got called. My value bets got folded to or owned by a better hand. I studied so many hours. I actually have already reached 100 hours of study in 2024, mostly in April and May, in preparation for my trip to play in the WSOP and the other summer tournaments out there in Sin City. And I'm telling you guys, sometimes the poker gods are relentless and cruel and harsh. And as we all should know by now, there just is no justice in this game. And the main event was brutal. I didn't make it to day two. In fact, I only made it to one day two in the entire summer, which is kind of ridiculous if you consider that I played in 38 different tournaments. Well, 38 buy-ins. Some of them were the same tournament twice. But only making one day two all summer long is pretty tough to swallow. And even worse than that, the only day two that I made, I didn't cash in that tournament anyway. So, you know, if I'm laughing and giggling, I do keep a smile on my face. And this is so important, guys. You never want to gamble with money that you can't afford to lose. So you've got to be able to absorb those losses. Anytime you risk your bankroll or a percentage of your bankroll on a particular poker series or festival, it's very important that you're not over focused on the outcomes. You've got to be able to make great decisions. I'm going to be honest, on the last day or two in Vegas, I was starting to be a little bit overcome with the outcomes and the reality of how much money I was down. And I don't mean that it affected my play, at least I don't think that I did. And in reviewing the last few tournaments, the hands that I played, I don't really notice any timid play on my part, trying to min cash just to, get a win of some kind or anything of that nature. But I just started to feel it more. Like usually I can pretty much shrug off losing a coin flip. By the way, I went 2 for 10 in important, significant coin flips this summer. So that's part of what went wrong. I just couldn't win the big flips when I needed to. Now these would be anytime it's like half my stack or more, all in pre-flop in a coin flip situation. For example, pocket nines versus opponent's ace queen or vice versa. And I just won 2 out of 10 of those big moments. Now, one good sign is that I didn't have 20 or 30 such moments. That means that my stacks weren't getting so short that I would need to get into that type of situation very often. In years past, I've had up to 20 or 25 coin flips throughout the course of a summer. And this summer, there were really only 10 times when I was really in that spot and just needed to win the flip. And only won 2 of them. In most of the other cases, I busted out of the tournament or just ended up, severely crippled by the loss. Anyway, there's not much use in dwelling on the results. obviously, when I pack my bags and leave for Vegas, or way before that, actually in January when the schedule first starts to leak and I start to look at different hotels and making arrangements so that I can be there and everything. I mean, the World Series of Poker is the thing that I look forward to the most each and every year, more so than any comedy performance or TV appearance or anything else that I do. I just love it. And even after all the abuse that the poker gods bestowed upon me in the last 2 months, I still love it. And I'm already looking forward to next year. And by the way, guys, next year I plan to win 8 out of 10 coin flips just to balance out for this year's bad luck. So look out for me next summer because I'm coming back with a vengeance. All right, enough about my stupid variance. Nobody wants to hear about that. And it's not useful in terms of analysis anyway. So let's just move on. I want to talk a little bit about one very small controversy and one very large controversy and give you my opinions on both. So the small one first. At one point during the summer, I was in a tournament at the Horseshoe, and I just tweeted to the tournament director that we colorblind people have trouble distinguishing between the red chips and the green chips that were in play in that tournament. And I thought that it might be useful for the tournament director to know that this particular chip set, and many of you might not realize this, but they use a number of different chipsets during the WSOP so that chips from one tournament don't end up in another tournament, or you can't just show up with some chips that you smuggled out of there last time in your pocket and know for sure which chipset you're going to have. You know, if you're Men the Master or something like that and you've got some hoarded chips, they try to make it hard for people to cross-pollinate the chips or whatever. But there's one particular set, and I posted a picture of it on twitter.com/ClaytonComic, and I just, made a note for the tournament director, just so you know, this particular chip stack is very difficult for us colorblind people to use. And because I was being lighthearted about it, and I wasn't trying to say this is some sort of major catastrophe or something like that, I put hashtag inclusivity, which I thought was kind of funny because you just hear that word being thrown around all the time. So I was like, hey, what about us colorblind people? I was certainly not saying this is a travesty of justice or someone should be punished for overlooking us colorblind people. A lot of the comments were like, yeah, I'm also colorblind and I have trouble with that stack, which is great. But so many of the comments were snarky towards me, like, well, luckily for you, they write the numbers on the chip so you know the chip amounts. And yeah, that's really great for my chip stack. Like, I can look, and that's what I do actually when I play in a tournament where I have trouble differentiating some of the chips. I do actually look at each chip, and as I'm stacking them, I have to go through and look at each and every chip and read the numbers on them so that I know which stack to put them in. Now, are these first world problems? Is this something that I shouldn't complain about because I have so much privilege or something? Or is this something that would be easily fixed by the tournament director saying, we have 5 or 6 different chipsets, and this one poses a problem for about 8% of all men. So why don't we just take this one out of play and just use the other 5? And when we do get to the point where we decide to spend some of the millions and millions of dollars that we rake in every summer, literally using a rake, we'll invest some of that raked profit on a new set of chips that is not confusing for people who have color blindness problems. I couldn't believe it. And just the ignorance of thinking that it's only important for me to read the numbers on my chips. What about when I'm looking at my opponent's stack from across the table? Am I supposed to try to read the numbers on each individual chip in his stack? And they don't really have much enforcement of the stacks of 20 rule anyway. So somebody might have a whole bunch of chips piled up over his head, and I can't tell which ones are red and which ones are green. But it just shows how toxic Twitter has become. I feel like at this point, there's nothing you could tweet. You could be like, it's a beautiful day to go outside and enjoy some sunshine. And somebody would find a reason to hate you for tweeting that. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not exactly ready to get off the platform because I've always enjoyed being on Twitter. But at this point, wow. I mean, I was very surprised at not only how much hate I got for this one, but just how arrogant the people that were hating on me, who obviously don't play poker or haven't really thought about what it would be like to be a colorblind person playing poker, at least, how arrogant they were and how sure they were that the solution was so simple. All I have to do is read the numbers on the chips. Well, yeah, that works for my chips, but I have 7, 8 opponents here that I can't read all their numbers. I mean, I don't have 2011 vision or whatever it would take for me to read numbers on somebody else's chips all the way across the table. But anyway, let me know your thoughts on twitter.com/ClaytonComic and feel free to spew as much hate for me making this commentary as you want to. Also, there was another much bigger controversy that I'm sure many of you have already been following. And of course, I'm talking about in the main event at the final table, the eventual winner, Tamayo, he had a group of friends and I think backers, including Dominic Nietzsche, who is supposedly trying to gain a reputation as a coach and a poker ambassador, looking at a laptop and looking at what appears to be solver information to then share with his horse. And so these guys are basically using RTA, and then he's going in between hands and they're telling him about ranges, or, you know, we don't actually know exactly what all was being said, but it's clear that somebody was not acting within the spirit of the rules of the game. I mean, he may have been acting within the letter of the law, if you will. Strictly speaking, there's nothing in the rules that says you can't have friends on the rail that are analyzing the hands while you're playing them, etc. Look, guys, it's pretty simple to solve this. I do think we should be allowed to have a crowd of people gathered to root for us and cheer for us and make a lot of noise whenever we win the pot. I know for me personally, when I got deep in the main event back in 2018, with 35 players left, I had 2 of my friends, Andrew Brokus and Carlos Welch, who are, by the way, the co-hosts of the incredibly useful Thinking Poker podcast, which I think you guys, most of you probably are aware of. But in case you never heard of that one, guys, that's a great podcast that you should all be listening to. ThinkingPoker.net. Free plug for my friends Andrew and Carlos over there at the Thinking Poker podcast. Now, they were in the crowd cheering for me on day 6 or day 7, whatever it was that year, when we had 35 players left and I was one of the chip leaders and it was looking really good. Maybe I was going to become a multi-millionaire through poker. And every single time I dragged a pot, even if I just stole the blinds, these guys were hooping and hollering, and there were some other friends there as well cheering for me. And that felt good, and it kind of creates more of an atmosphere of something exciting is happening here. So I don't think we should disallow people to be in the crowd. But one thing I never do, and that I don't actually think we should be allowed to do, is I never got up from the table and went over to Andrew, who's way better at poker than I am, and say, hey, I had ace queen. Do you think I should have called the 3-bet there? Like, I didn't talk strategy with those guys. I just waved to them. And I think at one point I may have gone over and given somebody a high five, and that should be the spirit of the crowd. The crowd should not be in there analyzing every single move you make and then being able to tell you in real time what your range should be on the next hand or what your opponent had. Like if they're watching the stream, they shouldn't be telling you what happened 30 minutes ago on the stream. Like, I don't think that's the spirit of why we want to be allowed to have a crowd. And I think that due to this controversy, which people are still talking about weeks later, I think that they will change the rules next year, and perhaps players will be forced to stay in their seats at the final table or the featured table or whatever the case may be. And it's because bad actors have decided to try to find an angle where they can jump in and find a loophole. The bottom line is study should happen before play, not during play. And the person studying should also be the person playing. It's not, it's supposed to be one player per hand. You're not supposed to have a team of poker pros that are analyzing situations for you. Now, if you extend the analogy to boxing, there is a break after each round. And during that round, your coach can say, hey, you're dropping your left hand. You need to protect your right side better. Don't let him get you with his uppercut, whatever, that sort of thing. Obviously, I know so much about boxing, guys. But you can tell that there's a difference between, like, after each punch, having a coach point something out, which would be impossible in boxing because it's so fast. But poker's much slower. I don't think players should be allowed out of their seats until that 20-minute break between levels. And at that time, if Dominic wants to tell you what he observed on the PokerGo stream, or what the RTA or the DTO or whatever supercomputer he's using has told, I don't mind that during that break. But, after every hand going to the rail and being like, hey, what does the solver think? That's not what solvers are for, guys. That's going to ruin the game. And so I'm really hoping that the new rule next year is players must remain in their seats, or at least coaching is not permitted during a level. So if a player wants to go to the bathroom, that's fine. But what you're going to lose, my way, is some of those really warm moments where I just think of Chrissy when she needed to hit a lucky card and she's over there with Alex and some friends, and just, the drama of her getting lucky and hitting that ace that she needed. I think she had ace king versus kings for her tournament life with 15 players left. I could be wrong about the exact details. But, watching a player with family, friends, loved ones, and then just the elation of, the luck going their way, and then hugging each other and cheering, that is nice, and that is wholesome, and that is fun to watch. But if it means that some people are going to take that opportunity to get real-time coaching, then, well, I guess we just can't have nice things. Everybody stay in your seat with your phone turned off, and problem solved. All right, let's get into it, guys. I want to go back to last week's episode, and I want to do some solver work of my own, but in the way that nature intended, away from the table and not during the competition. And I'm, of course, using GTO Wizard. Now, GTO Wizard, in my humble opinion, is the number one product on the market right now to help you improve your poker game. You can play in real time against a GTO opponent that you'll never be able to beat, I don't think. Good luck with that. You can also analyze hands that you've already played, either by typing in the details and letting the solver do the rest, or you can actually upload hands that you've played online on a site like ACR Poker and let the solver find and plug leaks in your game. So if you guys are interested in GTO Wizard, I have a great deal for you. You can get 24 hours unlimited access to all of GTO Wizard's features and save 10% off your first purchase by using the affiliate link in the description of this podcast, which is gtowizard.com/p/TPE. So last week we talked about one of my favorite plays, the Big Squeeze. I've been wanting to do this for a while now and see what the wizard thinks about the Big Squeeze. Now, you guys know about the squeeze play. Somebody raises, somebody calls, and then you put in a big raise, either all in if you're short, or just a big 3-bet if you're deeper, obviously hoping to take down the pot with a less than stellar holding. It's the same play you would make with pocket aces or pocket kings, but in the squeeze play, you don't want action. So the Big Squeeze is when there's more than one caller. That's just what I call it. If somebody raises and then 2 or 3 people call, or even 4 people call, and you take a hand that doesn't want action, and you either go all in or just put in a huge 3-bet. Now, the reason why I've always loved this play, especially with about 25 or 30 big blinds, it feels like it's a great play because you're laying a price to increase your stack by a large amount. In the hand we talked about last week, just by taking it down pre-flop, you would increase your stack by 50% if you get no action. And if you do get action, as was the case in my personal experience in the 3K Mid-Stakes Championship, which, by the way, was the aforementioned only day 2 that I made this summer, you can actually more than double up. I went from 26,000 to 65,000 by getting lucky using the big squeeze. So let's review the action quickly, and then we'll talk about what the wizard has to say about my decision to shove with Queen 10 of Hearts. So the blinds were 500 and 1,000 with a 1,000 big blind ante, and we had 26,000. So our M was just over 10, and we had 26 big blinds in the stack. There was an open from second position from a fairly loose older player, and then the next player called, and then another player called, and then the guy on my right called, and I was on the button holding the Queen of Hearts, 10 of Hearts, and at that point there was already 12,500 in the middle, and I had 26,000. So I think the shove is profitable because very often such a big raise is going to take down the pot. And when it doesn't, yes, I'll be all in with my tournament life at risk. But when called, I will often have a decent hand versus my opponent's range. For example, if my opponent has pocket nines, I have a coin flip. If he has pocket jacks, which I don't block, I'm about 30% to win. We're in big trouble against pocket queens, which is hard to have when I hold a queen. We're in pretty big trouble against aces or kings, and we're in bad shape against ace queen. Everything else that calls, sure, we're never a favorite, but many times we're doing okay, and we're getting a great price because of all the dead money from all the callers who now have to fold. Usually the only person you can get action from in this situation is the original raiser, who will also often fold to such a big 3-bet. So let's take a look at what the wizard thinks on the button facing a raise and a call and a call and a call. I shoved laying 2-1 roughly to the pot with Queen 10 suited. So Queen 10 suited is mostly a fold. The wizard has us at 61% fold, 37% call, and 2% all in. So the wizard technically approves my play, but probably would rather have a better hand. So let's look now at the range for shoving in this spot. Well, interesting right off the bat here, and I can't figure this out. Queen Jack suited never shoves. Queen 10 suited shoves 2% of the time. Queen Jack suited never shoves. King 10 suited shoves 63% of the time. King Jack suited shoves 83% of the time. So although the wizard doesn't do exactly what I did with exactly the hand that I had very often, it is doing it with similar hands. Like, it's incredible to me that Queen 10 suited is a 2% shove in this spot, but King 10 suited is a 63% shove. It's just a little bit better of a hand, but I think it has to do with the blocker effect. The wizard doesn't like not having an ace or a king, I'm guessing. When we're doing this as a bluff, which I clearly was, I definitely did not want action. Although, as you guys may recall from last week, I got action from the original raiser, who isolated me with his ace-queen and ended up losing to my flopped flush. But that's just the results. Let's look at these strategies. Ace-jack suited goes all in 100% of the time. Ace-10 suited, Ace-9 suited. These are all shoves. So the solver likes to have an ace. Obviously pocket aces, pocket kings, all the way down to pocket sevens. But once we get below sevens, it's a pure call. Pocket sixes, pocket fives, and below, they all just call 100%. But sevens and above, shove, shove, shove. Eights, nines, tens, all the way up to aces. We never slow play. We don't do any other kind of raise. Just get the whole stack in. Also, ace-king off every time. Ace-queen off every time. Ace-jack is a mix. Ace-jack offsuit, 26% shove, 48% fold, by the way, and call the rest. Ace-9 suited. That one was interesting to me. That's a pure shove in this spot. King-queen suited, guys, 59% of the time, all in. with king, queen suited. So we are shoving king, jack suited 83% of the time, king 10 suited 63% of the time, and king, queen suited calls 41% and shoves 59%. So it's a little bit counterintuitive. It's not what we call a linear range. It's not like the better your hand, the more often you want to shove. Queen jack suited basically never shoves, and queen 10 suited shoves a little bit, very little bit. And as I've learned through hours of study in the last several months, the solver really doesn't like to be offsuit. Ace 10 offsuit, a pure fold. Ace 10 and below, king jack offsuit, pure fold. King queen offsuit, never shoves, mostly folds, calls 24% of the time. Queen jack offsuit, pure fold. Jack 10, queen 10, king 10 off, pure folds. So that's the range, guys. And what I've learned from this is that the big squeeze is a perfectly valid play, but maybe you're better off waiting until you have a better hand that with better blockers, at least, something like king 10 suited instead of queen 10 suited, just so your opponent is that much less likely to be able to call with a premium hand. I think from there we can see why this program is so useful. You can really get in there and dig deep into the math and the artificial intelligence that has pretty much solved the game of tournament poker and use what the computers already know to your advantage. But of course, not while you're playing heads up for the World Championship in the main event. All right, let's move on to another hand I played over the summer. I had some interesting spots in the Monster Stack, which if I'm being honest, the Monster Stack is not a tournament that I play very often. It takes 5 days. It's a $1,500 buy-in. I usually don't enter this tournament because I don't want to lock up almost a week of my World Series on a $1,500 buy-in. Now, obviously, the Monster Stack gets a lot of interest, and there are plenty of players who enter. And if you happen to final table it, you'll be very glad you spent the $1,500. But I prefer the smaller buy-ins to be tournaments that go by quickly, so that if I don't get anything going, I can move on to another potentially profitable tournament. But this year, I did enter this event, and I'm glad I did. I mean, there are a lot of people, I didn't realize this, but a lot of people treat the Monster Stack like it's their main event. So many amateur players, they come in for that weekend, and they want to play the Monster Stack. They want to have a lot of chips. They want to be able to take a few beats and still be in the tournament. They don't want the super turbo bounty because they don't feel like they get enough value for the buck. And the Monster Stack, if nothing else, does offer a lot of play for a relatively small buy-in. So I'm glad I entered. I will probably play it again next year now that I see what the field is like. So with the blinds at 400, 800, with an 800 big blind ante, we had 58,000 in the stack. So we were doing just fine, probably right around average at that point. Registration still open. I believe you start this tournament with 50K in chips. So we had about 72 big blinds and our M was 29. The action folded to Hero Clayton in the low jack with 2 black kings. So I'm going to make the same raise with this hand that I've been making with the other hands that I've been opening, and that everyone seems to have adopted as the standard betting size at this table, which is 1,800. So I don't want to do anything unusual. I saw many of my opponents in this tournament, if they had a big premium pair, they raised to like 7,000. And if they just had like a normal hand like Ace Jack, they opened to 1,800. That's kind of like putting a big spotlight on yourself and saying, hey, I've got a very big hand. Who wants to come and try to crack it? You want to play your range, not your hand. So just 1,800 here from the low jack. And then the next player to act, the hijack, calls. And everybody else folds. So we're going to see a flop from out of position, Hero holding the king of spades, king of clubs. And with 5,600 in the middle, the flop comes 7 of hearts, 5 of diamonds, deuce of hearts. So 7, 5 deuce with 2 hearts, Hero with pocket kings. Well, in years past, guys, I definitely would have bet this flop. It's obviously a great flop for pocket kings. It's very unlikely my opponent has two pair. It's always unlikely that your opponent has a set. And you could get action from one pair or a flush draw or a straight draw on this board. So there's a lot of merit to betting. But my solver work with GTO Wizard in the last several months has taught me that very, very often when we are out of position, heads up, we should check to our opponent. So that's exactly what I do here. I decide to check, and my opponent fires. He bets 2,500 into 5,600. And I think that nowadays most players are going with a smaller sizing a lot. So I was a little alarmed that he put in almost half the pot. Nowadays you see a lot of quarter pot, 20% pot, or 30% pot bets on the flop. So I was a little worried that I could be behind, but obviously you can't worry about everything. And as I mentioned, it is a great flop for kings. He could be betting this chunky size with a pair or a draw or even a pure bluff. And the reason why I say he could have a pure bluff is because many times less experienced opponents will assume that I am unable to check this flop with an overpair. It looks like I have something like king, queen, or ace, jack, and I'm just giving up because I missed the flop and I don't want to fight for this one anymore. And so by checking, you give him the chance to try to steal the pot. And in lower stakes tournaments, your opponent's in his shoes, your opponent will always bet the flop. Like, so if I'm up against Clayton, but I'm playing in like the $300 daily deep stack and Clayton checks, I can pretty much fire this pot with impunity and pretty much take it down close to 100% of the time, because why wouldn't Clayton bet with the overpair? By the way, my opponent I do think he's an amateur opponent. I think he's a weekend warrior type. Maybe comes to Vegas just for one or two tournaments during the World Series. Maybe he lives in a place like San Diego and has a good job, but he loves poker and he wants to come out and get in there and mix it up and try to collect a bracelet along the way, right? So that's the type I think he is. Very nice guy, kind of chit-chatty at the table, offered me change as soon as I sat down. I had bought in late, and when you do that, they just give you a bunch of big chips, and without having to be asked, he's like, hey, do you want me to break one of your 5K chips? And, just that kind of guy. So with all that in mind, we can't really fold the pocket kings at this point. So I call, and I've decided to just kind of continue checking to him throughout the hand. So I call, and now there's 10,600 in the middle. By the way, the opponent has about the same monster size stack as we do, so there's not much danger of anybody getting all in this situation, but you never know. And the turn comes the deuce of diamonds. So our board is now 7 of hearts, 5 of diamonds, deuce of hearts, deuce of diamonds, 7, 5, deuce, deuce with 2 hearts. And I, of course, check again. And I'm expecting my opponent to check back most of the time if he has a 7 or a 5. Probably even check a lot of his draws back. So I was surprised to see him reach for chips and throw in 6,000 into the 10.6K pot. I'm starting to worry that I could be behind here. I've got 2 kings. This guy's betting a card that I don't really expect him to bluff a lot. He has to worry because I called him on the flop that maybe he's beat if he's even got like a hand like 7-8, right? What did I call with? I'm probably not check calling with a hand like King Jack, right? So I was trying to do some hand reading, but at the same time, guys, you don't want to overthink these things. Like if you play your hand in a way that doesn't reveal your strength, you generally have to call. So in other words, when you check a strong hand to your opponent and your opponent bets, you've got to call. Like really, you don't want to be check folding pocket aces, pocket kings in this situation. Like if I'm beat, I'm beat. But if I'm playing it this way, I can't start overthinking and then folding my overpair. Like if he's got me, he's got me. I don't know. What does he have? Pocket 5s or something? Of course that's possible, but it just seems like there are so many other hands that are still in his potential range as an opponent that maybe doesn't study very hard and doesn't necessarily have a feel for when to control the size of the pot and when to bluff. So because of that, I want to just call again. I mean, this is the game plan for the hand, and I shouldn't let his large bet sizing on the turn about 66% changed my game plan. Now, if I did have a read on this opponent, like if I felt a lot of strength or that he was trying to convey weakness as an actor, but I felt like he was really strong and that he's trying to act nervous, but he's not really nervous, then maybe I can start to consider throwing away the kings. But I think in those situations, you have to be really sure. Otherwise, you're really wasting a big premium hand against an opponent who could very well be bluffing. So I decided to call once again. And now this pot is getting big thanks to my opponent's sizing on both the flop and the turn. And now with 22,600 in the middle, the river comes the queen of diamonds for a final board of 7, 5, deuce, deuce, queen. And no flush came in. So no straights and no flushes got there. And I check one more time, fully expecting my opponent to check most of his range, but instead he fires 12,000 into the pot of 22,600, so just over half the pot size, offering me 3-1 on a call. And I'm sitting there with two kings like, do you honestly have me beat? Like, wow, what is going on here? Is this guy capable of triple barreling as a bluff? And then I'm in the tank a little bit. I mean, I probably took about a minute, which is a long time for me, to make this decision. I'm sitting there with two kings and I'm just trying to size this guy up. Is he a weekend warrior that's actually throwing away his whole monster stack on a bluff? Does he have a hand like pocket nines? Could he bet nines on the queen river? I don't think so. Did he slow play pre-flop with pocket queens and now just hit a full house on the end? Does he have 4 deuces? What is going on? And I started thinking to World Series of Poker past, when I didn't know about GTO Wizard, and I would pretty much always have taken the lead on the flop instead of checking to my opponent. And I was in the tank, but I just decided that kings are too good to fold, and if I'm beat, I'm beat. So I very, very trepidatiously threw in the 12K to call my opponent's bet, and the opponent turned over the king of diamonds, 5 of diamonds, for just one pair of 5s, and I win this big pot. So the first thing that tells me is that I have the flop wrong, at least the suits. The flop was 7-5 deuce with 2 hearts and 1 diamond, and that diamond must not have been the 5 as originally stated. But more importantly, my opponent was really getting after it. I mean, he blocks a set of 5s. So that's one thing, I guess. But why would you bet on the... I don't understand my opponent's play. I guess he just, when you check to him, he's the type who says, well, in my experience, when people check after having raised pre-flop, when they check from out of position, they usually don't have anything. This is an example of if you're used to playing at a certain buy-in level and then you move up to higher stakes, you will see things that you don't normally see in your game. Like, I imagine those of you who play like the daily $100 tournament at your local card room, when somebody raises pre-flop and then you call in position and the flop comes 7 high and that player checks, you can pretty much take to the bank that your opponent doesn't have a hand like aces, kings, or queens, because they would always want to bet. They're worried about giving you a free card to hit your draw. You know, players in smaller stakes tournaments tend to worry about getting outdrawn more than players in higher stakes tournament, where we are more concerned with what our range wants to do rather than what our hand wants to do. But this is a big pot that I ended up winning, even though I was tempted to throw away the kings because I just had to keep asking myself, does this guy have this play in him with king 5 in this spot? And I just don't know what he's doing. I mean, is he going for value? Was he turning his hand into a bluff because he blocks the full house? Or was he just betting because I was checking? I tend to think it's the latter, but who knows? I mean, I didn't really get to discuss his strategy with him after the fact, and I don't think you should ever do that either, by the way. I hate when I lose a pot to some kid and then he's like, if I would have shoved, would you have called? Look, you already won the pot. Don't start asking me about my strategy and, pour salt in the wound. I think that's very rude to do. But I understand that sometimes people don't have good manners and that we don't necessarily expect proper etiquette at the poker table. But I thought this was an interesting spot, and it shows that the robots will always play perfectly, but maybe for us mortals, always checking or often checking from out of position can create a few problems. This hand should have been much easier for me to play. For example, if I bet the flop, check the turn, and bet the river, I'm going to have an easy time playing pocket kings. I made it harder on myself, and thankfully, my decisions worked out this time. That'll do it for this episode. Guys, if you're not yet on ACR Poker, you should join right now so that you can participate in the free roll this weekend. There's a link in the description of this podcast, and if you click that link, guys, you can get a 100% first-time deposit bonus up to $2,000 just by using the promo code TPE. And for everyone here at Tournament Poker Edge, with special thanks, as always, to our very generous sponsor, ACR Poker, I'm Clayton Fletcher. Thank you so much for listening.
I wanna hold them like they do in Texas plays. Fold them, let them hit me, raise it, baby, stay with me. Luck and intuition, play the cards with babes to start. And after she's been hooked, I'll play the one that's on her heart.